Hey everybody, since we've now had a few months to evaluate Omens of Destruction and a new year has started and the whole world's gone crazy, I decided it's a good time to reassess the current state of Total War Warhammer 3. I think I may title this video, "Is it a masterpiece or a turd?" because I think you can make the argument for either case. So I'm going to break this down into the good, the bad, and a third section that I haven't thought of a name for yet, but it's really important when talking about the state of the game and its future. I'll be as succinct as possible, which you all know I'm not really very good at, but I'll try. But for anybody who just wants the short and sweet conclusion without all the extra context, I will go ahead and say that Warhammer 3 reminds me a lot of another game in another genre, Skyrim. A really, really good game with some really glaring problems, but blessed with a thriving modding community which not only addresses many of those glaring problems, but builds on the strengths of the game to make them even better. I have over 1,000 hours in Skyrim and would play still more of it if there were more hours in the day. And now I'm approaching about 2,000 hours in Warhammer 3 and still find it tons of fun despite the occasional frustrations. And somehow I'm both pessimistic and optimistic about its future for the next few years. If that summary was all you wanted, thanks for your time. The rest of this video is going to be me going into a little more detail on all the things I just mentioned. So, let's start with the good. One of the first videos I ever made on this channel, a little more than a year ago, was called Warhammer 3 is Better Than You Think. I made that at a time that I think a lot of us would agree was the low point for the game. CA had simultaneously raised their DLC prices, released the worst DLC of the franchise, and insulted the player community who had the audacity to complain about it. Since then, CA has objectively improved their content and their customer relations, if not their prices. And, well, at least Meatloaf told us that 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So we've gotten 2 more DLCs since then, Thrones of Decay and Omens of Destruction. The first was the best DLC of the entire series. The second one was a mix of good and bad, and unfortunately is probably the bar for what we should expect going forward. But that leads us into the best thing about Warhammer 3. It captures the theme, the setting, the endless variety, and the brutal violence of the Warhammer world. It's a beautiful game to look at, and I don't think enough is said about how awesome it is to see the minis we used to move around on a tabletop come alive on our screens. There are currently 100 different legendary lords you can play as in the vanilla game, or more than 100 if you include mods. More on that in a minute. Spanning 24 different playable races. All of those races have unique mechanics, and in many cases, individual legendary lords within the same race have unique mechanics. And this is the biggest strength of the game compared to other Total War games. The difference between Rome and Egypt is nothing compared to the difference between Throt the Unclean of the Skaven and Helman Gorst of the Vampire Counts, or between Thorgrim Grudgebearer of the Dwarfs and Khazrak of the Beastmen. And I haven't even mentioned the demonic factions yet, which all play differently than mortals and from each other. The world map is also massive, as it needs to be to fit all these factions, and also to do justice to the world of Warhammer. Not surprisingly, with all this going on, there are imbalances between playable lords. Some feel overpowered, some underpowered, some right in the middle. I know a lot of people consider this a bad thing, but I don't see it that way at all. I never expected my Total War games to be perfectly balanced. Playing the Holy Roman Empire in medieval Total War was not the same challenge as playing Denmark. Likewise, playing as the Roman Empire was not the same as Carthage in Rome Total War, which is a good thing because there are times when you might want a more chill, relaxed campaign, and other times when you might wish for a real challenge. Speaking of Total War, we have to acknowledge that the Total War games have been the best combination strategy and tactics games for more than 2 decades now. This is no small thing. It scratches a niche for many of us that non-Total War games just haven't been able to. I'll talk about the differences between the Total War titles through the years a little more in the bad section. But here in the good, I need to point out how the massive variety of leaders, mechanics, locations, climates, troop types, monsters, heroes, personalities, and themes give this game more replayability than any other. There are, of course, more things that make the game good. Too many to list in a video like this. So I hit what I think are the most objectively great things about it. But now, in the interest of this video not lasting an hour, let's talk about the bad. I'm going to break this down into two parts: the game engine and the design, with the understanding that CA's decision-making plays a role in both. Simply speaking, the game engine is suboptimal. It shouldn't be surprising that battles with thousands of models, each making individual movements and calculations, would sometimes have performance issues. I think the game runs pretty smoothly in that respect, all things considered. Although admittedly, I have a fairly high-end gaming PC, so your mileage may vary. But a lack of stutters is one thing. Bad AI pathfinding and quirky behavior is another. I hesitate to beat this drum too loudly because there's so much going on, and it's amazing that the battles play out as well as they do most of the time. Unfortunately, there are just too many times where units ignore orders, get stuck somewhere they shouldn't, and generally act kind of brain dead. I recently made a video focusing on the problems of trying to get your own units to attack fleeing units, so I'll not go on about that here. I'll just say that chances are, if you've played more than a handful of battles, you've run into some frustrations. And the elephant in the room is that some of these problems either don't occur or aren't as bad in older Total War games. Some of these issues are fairly trivial, some are mere nuisances that are easy enough to work around once you learn a little about the quirkiness of the game, but a few of them are unacceptable in a game as mature and supposedly well-polished as this. The fact that they've lingered in the game for years now is a red flag. This leads me to my biggest source of pessimism about the game, both in its current state and looking towards the future. CA, just like any game studio, is going to be motivated to put resources into what makes them money. In this case, adding new lords and units in paid DLCs gives them way more bang for their buck than fixing underlying issues in the game engine. We've heard lip service paid to some of these problems through the many patches that have come and gone. At this point, it's just wishful thinking to presume they'll all get fixed before a new Total War franchise replaces Warhammer as King of the Hill. As for design, there are a few questionable decisions that I could nitpick, but I will say I think things have mostly improved since the early release of Realms of Chaos and the apparent ignoring of outside advice. I think CA listened to the community more now than before, so I want to give credit where it's due. Having said that, I think there's still room for improvement there. Just taking the latest DLC as an example, there are design decisions that got implemented that are real head-scratchers, whether we're talking about easy ways to exploit new corn mechanics or just badly designed ogre camps. Still, not every DLC is going to be a winner, and I don't want to make it seem like every design decision is questionable. The Beastmen rework, the Warriors of Chaos rework, the Dwarfs rework, there are lots of examples of really well done design. I just want to acknowledge that not everything here is as good as it could be. And I have to spend just a minute talking about another design pet peeve of mine, minor settlement layouts. There are other issues with minor settlement battles as well, but for me, so many of the layouts just absolutely drive me crazy. Settlement battles, whether minor or major, should be the best part of a Total War game, but when you have layouts where half the choke points have buildable barricades and the other half don't, when towers are located poorly where they can't fire effectively, or are further inside the settlement than the control point that once taken automatically destroys them, it just makes you wonder who the heck designed these maps. Alright, anyway, so I mentioned my source of pessimism. What's my main source of optimism when it comes to Warhammer 3? What makes me continue to not only play the game, but recommend it to friends? the modding community. There's too much here to go in depth into the many spectacular mods available at no cost to the player. Whether we're talking about new content, be it units or heroes or lords or even new factions, new takes on existing mechanics or entirely new mechanics, just tweaks to the base game or complete overhauls, there's no way to do justice to what's already available, and there's always more coming. Some, but not all, of the things I listed in the bad section are addressed by mods. Don't get me wrong, it's much better when CA provides fixes in the base game, but it's good to know that other options are out there. I mentioned Skyrim earlier. That game feels like it's 100 years old, and yet it still goes strong and even keeps getting better due to the work of committed mod authors. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that that could be the future of Total War Warhammer as well. The modding community is what gives me hope for the next 1,000 hours of this game, if not beyond. I'll take just a second to thank them here for what they do. And I encourage other people to do so as well. So what's my overall conclusion? I think ultimately Creative Assembly made a flawed masterpiece. I want to acknowledge that they created a game that's given me tons of enjoyment, and when I criticize the details, it's out of a place of respect. I just want the game to be as good as possible. Alright, I'll wrap up there. Maybe not as succinct as some of you were hoping, but I did the best I could. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you in the next video.